Whilst unpacking the long-awaited piston, I'd like to thank you for clicking on part 2 of this top-end rebuild series. I originally set out to make this a 2-part series, however I couldn't condense all of the content into 2 videos, so it will now have a 3rd and final part. Here in part 2, I'll be installing the piston, the cylinder, the combustion chamber, and then rechecking the squish with the new components installed. I'll then be reinstating the engine and starting the bike assembly. I'd just like to say that parts 1 and 2 of this top-end rebuild series may be enough information for moderately experienced people to replace their own pistons. Part 3 will be focused on general bike assembly and refilling oils and fluids. I've summarised the videos in the description below so that you can decide on which video might be more appropriate for you. Again, thanks for all your support so far. I'll leave you with the video. Before buying a new piston, you'll need to check the size of your cylinder. Your cylinder should be marked with an A, AB, or B. These letters indicate the size of the cylinder when the bike was new. Piston size cannot be determined by these letters alone. However, they serve as a good reference point for the engineer when having your cylinder measured. Here I'm measuring the ring end gap on the new piston rings. For safety's sake and peace of mind, I'd just like to make sure that the new components are within spec and in accordance with the manual. Here I insert a new ring into the barrel, and then carefully using the top of the piston, I push the ring into the cylinder about 15 mil. Using a feeler gauge, I check that the new rings are within spec and in accordance with the manual. You'll see that the new piston has 2 pins inside of the ring grooves. These pins are positioned on the ring end gap and stop the rings from moving around. My camera didn't pick this up very well, but each piston ring will have a marking. This marking and lettering should be facing up towards the top of the piston. Here I'm installing one of the new circlips onto the piston. This can be quite a tricky job, and it's best done on a workbench rather than leaning over the engine. What you need to make sure is that the arrow on the piston faces forward towards the exhaust. So the exhaust is this way, the arrow goes that way. Here I'm installing the final circlip. You should note that both circlips should be facing down. Also, the engine is filled with clean paper towels, just to catch the clip in case I drop it. Each Pro X gasket kit comes with 3 base gaskets. I'll be using the 0.3 gasket from this kit, as my bike originally had a 0.3 gasket on it. It's critical that you use the correct base gasket for your bike. Not only does a base gasket help determine the squish size of the engine, but it can also affect the port timing within the cylinder. Here I'm applying a small amount of gasket sealant to the parts of the engine where the cases meet. Not only does this help seal any small holes that might be there, but it also helps hold the gasket in place. It's critical here that both rings are seated in the correct place. Here I'm compressing the rings with my fingers and then slowly lowering the cylinder onto the piston. That feels good. Here I'm installing the 4 nuts that hold the cylinder in place. Now what I'm going to do is pinch these bolts in opposite directions here. Once I confirm that the squish is acceptable with the new components installed, I can then torque the nuts down to the required specification. So here is the old squish, and here is the new. Remembering it's not fully torqued up. So these are set to 30 as well. This has got the new seal, the rubber seal. Make sure that's well seated so you don't pinch it on the top of the barrel. Carefully place that on. Time to install the reed valve assembly. It's got a fresh gasket that we made. To check your reed valves, you need to hold them up against the light and see if you can see light through them. They're in good condition, they're not chipped or broken around the edges. The light will shine through if they're in bad condition. Using an Allen key socket. They're rated at 7. Removing or installing an engine on your own is quite hard. You can see how I struggled removing the engine in part 1. Similarly, I struggle to put the engine back in. I suggest having a friend help you if you can. I'm applying a small amount of grease to the plastic and rubber hose connections. This wire connects to the neutral gear switch. The clutch has just come off. Now if you wiggle this cable, you can see it moving in this hole. You see it right there? You need to reattach that to that silver piece right there with a set of these or a small hook. that can just fit in there, grab the cable and reattach it. You should leave a small amount of play on the clutch lever before the clutch is engaged. Just to check that the cable is connected properly, I'm pulling the lever and I can see the silver clutch arm move. On both battery terminals, I'm using small copper crush washers. So that's it for part 2. I'll wrap the video up there. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it or found this interesting. Or if you leave a comment, I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible.